Numerous rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip towards central Israel, the first rocket barrage directed at the area in 4 months. The rockets were fired from the Rafah area in the southern Gaza Strip. The IDF confirmed that 8 projectiles were identified crossing the area of Rafah into Israeli territory. A number of the projectiles were intercepted by the IDF aerial defense array, the IDF announced. Mada confirmed that medical teams did not locate any casualties at any of the scenes, except for a patient who was lightly injured on the way to seek shelter and a number of victims with stress symptoms. Israel, the United States, and Qatar have agreed to renew mediated talks on a truce for a hostage deal with Hamas. Over the weekend, the IDF brought back to Israel the bodies of 3 hostages murdered on October 7th, with their bodies held in Gaza. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
The fresh hostage for truce negotiations will reportedly be mediated by Egypt and Qatar on the basis of a new outline negotiated in Paris by CIA Director William Burns, Mossad Chief David Barnea, and Qatari Prime Minister Al-Thani. There has been no progress in talks since last month when Hamas failed to agree to the deal accepted by Israel. The War Cabinet expanded the mandate of the team negotiating a deal after reports that the Security Cabinet gave the team more room to maneuver. According to reports, Prime Minister Netanyahu was swayed by the broad support for the move and the recent release of footage showing the kidnapping of female IDF soldiers on October 7th. Meanwhile, after a complicated retrieval operation based on intelligence, the IDF has recovered the bodies of 3 captives murdered during the October 7th massacre and their bodies abducted to Gaza by Hamas terrorists.
It is with a heavy heart that I share that last night, Israeli special forces in Gaza rescued the bodies of our hostages, Hanania Vlonka, Michelle Nissenbaum, Orion Hernandez. Their bodies were rescued during a special operation based on precise intelligence in the area of Gaza.
The bodies of Hanania Blonka and Michal Nissenbaum were laid to rest today in Israel.
There are men, women, children, and babies being held by Hamas in living hell across our border in Gaza. We will not stop fighting for their freedom. Every decent country in the world would do the same.
The army believes that 128 hostages and bodies of hostages are still being held in Gaza.
Israel bonds, the heartbeat of solidarity, the powerhouse of support. When the Hamas-Israel war hit, Israel bonds stood tall, proving we're more than just an investment, we're a lifeline. Investing in Israel bonds isn't just a financial move, it's a declaration for resilience, strength, and a better future for Israel. Join us and let solidarity echo through generations.
The Israeli Defense Forces continue their offensive in Rafah, undeterred by an ambiguous halt order from the International Court of Justice. The ICJ's ruling delivered last week called for an emergency measures to protect civilians. Judges at the top United Nations Court ordered Israel on Friday to stop its military assault on Rafah in southern Gaza. ICJ President Nawaf Salam stated that the provisional measures from March were insufficient for the current situation, justifying a new emergency order. The court supported South Africa's request for this halt, following its accusations of genocide against Israel.
The court considers that, in conformity with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
The order was approved 13 votes to 2 by the justices on the court, with Uganda and Israel dissenting. However, this order has been criticized for its lack of clarity, which Israel seems to interpret as a non-binding suggestion rather than a mandatory ceasefire. It has stirred significant debate among international legal experts and policymakers. This has led to a continuation of IDF military actions aimed at dismantling Hamas terror infrastructure in the area.
European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell stated that the EU faces a challenging choice as it will need to clarify its position in reaction to the ICJ's ruling.
We will have to choose between our support to the international institution and the rule of law or our support to Israel. And both things is going to be quite difficult to make compatible.
Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, Israelis reacted to the International Court of Justice halt order.
It's not really connected to the reality. We need to go into Rafah. We need to sort of solve these issues. We need to get Hamas out of there. And, just calling for a one-sided ceasefire is not going to give any hope for a long-term solution. Hopefully we can achieve one at some point, but I don't think that's possible in the current situation.
The International Court of Justice is set to deliver another critical decision on emergency measures against Israel. This forthcoming decision is highly anticipated and could impose further legal and political pressures on Israel.
And joining us now is former mayor, attorney, and host of the Standpoint podcast, Gabriel Groisman. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Gabriel, the ICJ came out with this decision on Friday. It seems the wording of the ICJ's order regarding the Rafah operation is somewhat ambiguous. From your understanding, what does it mean exactly?
Look, the message is more important than what the wording is. If you look at actually the ruling, you can listen to it online. I listened to it this morning. They're saying that the operation should halt so there can be a further investigation of potential genocide, which we all know is absolute nonsense. The message is clear, and Hamas got that message. As this morning, as I'm sure you've reported, there's been a barrage of rockets from Hamas from Gaza to civilians in Israel, because what the ICJ did by making this ruling is give a green light to Hamas to continue attacking civilians, to continue its unbelievably unprecedented attack on civilian life in Israel with the protection of the world community. That's what the ICJ's ruling meant. Hamas, don't worry, we've got your back. That's the message of the United Nations this weekend.
Now, what does this decision mean for Israel? Is it binding?
So technically it's binding, but they don't have really any enforcement mechanism. So really what it is just another layer of pressure that the international community is putting on Israel. Israel is becoming more isolated. That is true. It's becoming a more divisive issue around the world. We have the International Criminal Court also, as I'm sure you've reported, seeking warrants potentially against Netanyahu and Gallant. These are just layers upon layers of international pressure that are being laid upon Israel to have them stop their war against Hamas, to stop their attempt to save the hostages and to fight back against this terror organization.
What further actions can the ICJ take if its orders are not fully adhered to?
I mean, that's a good question. They don't have any enforcement mechanism, so they can continue to condemn Israel. They can continue to create pressure, but they can't really do much. The ICJ, much like the ICC, is a kangaroo court. The ICC does have a mechanism with warrants and arrests that's a little bit more dangerous for those individual leaders that they're seeking warrants against. But the ICJ, it's just, we're going to hear more and more statements and condemnations and resolutions. But if you just peel the onion a little bit and see who's sitting in the ICJ, who's sitting in the United Nations Security Council, the bodies that are making these decisions, you're seeing that although these entities may have begun with the best of intentions, they've been taken over by the worst actors in the world.
Now, clearly, as we see and as is being reported, Israel has safely evacuated about 1 million Palestinians out of Rafah, and the U.S. now seems on board as opposed to previous concerns that they've voiced in the past. Can we expect the U.S. to veto the ICJ decision in the Security Council? Do you assess that it will?
That's a great question. It's a new day in the United States where we were not sure that the United States government will support Israel, but that's just the reality. The U.S. is supporting Israel's attack on Rafah only if it's a limited nature. So the all reports are there's some sort of agreement on a limited engagement in Rafah as opposed to a full-scale invasion. But you can't be half pregnant and you can't go to war halfway, which is what the United States wants Israel to do. Will the United States veto the resolution that will be coming by the UN Security Council? I hope so, but I don't take it to the bank.
Now let's talk about the global ramifications. Even if this decision is not binding legally, how does it impact Israel's image worldwide, which we know is not so great and not in a great state as it is?
Yeah, Israel's image worldwide has been tarnished. That's just a reality that we in the Jewish community around the world and the pro-Israel community around the world have to wrestle with. It's just a reality. The ICJ opinion will, in the United States, for example, won't have big ramifications here in the sense that people don't look at the United Nations with the same eyes that people around the world do. But in Europe and South America and Asia, really on the rest of the planet, the words of the United Nations and the ICJ really do have a lot of meaning. I think we're going to see a continued pressure from economic pressure, diplomatic pressure from countries around the world, countries that we've looked at as allies. Case in point was Germany, who throughout this war has been pretty good for Israel, which has been a breath of fresh air given the history of Germany. But just this week, they said on the ICJ matter that if there's an arrest warrant, they're going to enforce the arrest warrant. And just so the viewers know, there's never been an arrest warrant issued by the ICC against a sitting head of state. But this is the first one, and why not against the Jewish state?
Gabriel Grossman, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Day 233 of the war in Gaza. In the aftermath of the World Court ruling on the Rafah operation, the IDF is continuing to operate in the southern Gaza city with extreme caution to avoid civilian casualties. But ongoing clashes are continuing between IDF soldiers and Hamas militants in several areas of Gaza. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
The Rafah operation is continuing slowly. Airstrikes have been conducted carefully, choosing Hamas targets to avoid harming Rafah civilians still sheltering there. The army says that a cell that had opened fire at troops was killed, and several tunnel shafts were found and destroyed alongside caches of weapons. An estimated 1 million of the 1.4 million Palestinians who had been sheltering in Rafah have taken refuge in areas deemed safe by the IDF at the army's instructions. Troops operating in northern Gaza's Jabalia killed dozens of gunmen in close-quarter combat, and by calling in airstrikes over the weekend, the troops also located and demolished rocket launching sites and buildings used by terror groups. Among those killed were operatives who had directed attacks on troops and a Hamas sniper cell that opened fire at soldiers several times in recent days. Among those killed, the commander of the Hamas Bet Hanun battalion, Hussein Fiad, responsible for launching anti-tank missiles along with extensive mortar fire toward Israel. Meanwhile, the IDF is categorically denying that any soldiers have been taken captive by Hamas since the start of Israeli operations in Gaza. A spokesman for Hamas claimed its fighters had captured soldiers during fighting in Jabalia in northern Gaza on Saturday. Hamas showed no proof of the claim of an ambush inside a tunnel or the identities of those depicted. The IDF said bluntly there was no incident in which a soldier was abducted.
And on Israel's northern front, over the weekend, about 20 rockets were launched by Hezbollah at the Upper Galilee with direct hits in the northern border communities of Dovev and Manara. Israel struck back, hitting Hezbollah targets in Lebanon and in Syria. More from ILTV's William Sharon.
Most of the Hezbollah rockets fired over the weekend fell harmlessly, but there were direct strikes in Dovev and Manara. One of their targets hit their synagogue in Dovev. There were no injuries reported. Both of the communities in Dovev and Manara have been evacuated since the start of the cross-border exchange after October 7th. Israeli fighter jets struck back, hitting attacked Hezbollah sites and targets in South Lebanon and Syria. Jets carried out a wave of airstrikes against Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon, targeting buildings used by the terror group and other infrastructures in the area. IDF also carried out artillery shelling at a number of other locations in South Lebanon. Israel has carried out hundreds of strikes in Syria since the outbreak of the civil war in its northern neighborhood, mainly targeting army positions and Iran-backed fighters, including from Hezbollah. So far, the skirmishes on the border have resulted in 10 civilian deaths on the Israeli side, as well as the deaths of 14 IDF soldiers and reservists. Hezbollah has named 313 members who have been killed by Israel during the ongoing skirmishes, mostly in Lebanon, but some also in Syria.
Amid tensions between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Joe Biden over the handling of the war in Gaza, Republican U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson announced that the Israeli leader would soon address a joint meeting in Congress. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz reports.
The Biden administration is likely to strongly oppose Speaker Mike Johnson's announced intention to invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to address a joint session of Congress amid outspoken differences between the president and prime minister over Israeli conduct of the war in Gaza. Johnson said that support for Israel must be unconditional.
We must proclaim never again, and at the same time we have to affirm that all hope is not lost, that darkness will not prevail. Today, as international bureaucrats have issued arrest warrants for Israel's leaders and likened Israel's just war to the barbarism of October 7th, Washington has been united, I'm proud to tell you, in a bipartisan manner against this madness, and we will stand together.
Delivering a keynote speech at the Israeli Embassy's annual Independence Day reception, Speaker Johnson, the top congressional Republican and a critic of the Democratic president's Israel policy, said the invitation to Netanyahu would be a strong show of support for Israel.
And tonight I'm happy to announce something else to you, that we will soon be hosting Prime Minister Netanyahu at the Capitol for a joint session of Congress. Yes. This will be a timely and I think a very strong show of support to the Israeli government in their time of greatest need.
Such a speech would be certain to further anger some progressive Democrats who are increasingly critical of Israel's military campaign in Gaza and Biden's support for it. Meanwhile, President Biden is standing with Israel after the ICC ordered the arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Gallant, and 3 Hamas leaders. Biden said that Washington does not recognize the ICC jurisdiction and rejects what he called a false equivalency.
We've made our position clear on the ICC. We don't recognize the jurisdiction of ICC the way it's being exercised, and it's that simple. We don't think there's an equivalence between what Israel did and what Hamas did.
In a related development, the Biden administration is reportedly weighing the formation of a post-war Gaza peacekeeping force with the U.S. serving as civilian advisor. Politico reports that Washington could endorse the formation of a Palestinian or Arab peacekeeping force in post-war Gaza and is working to define what exactly this would look like. According to the report, the U.S. is also working to persuade Egypt, Morocco, and the United Arab Emirates to join the force should it be formed.
Anti-Semitism has been on the rise since the beginning of the war between Israel and Hamas. Over the weekend, this alarming trend was evident as anti-Semitic incidents occurred in a number of locations. ILTV's Rachel Safdie has more.
Over the weekend, gunmen opened fire at a Jewish girls' school in Toronto. A video shared on social media showed the 2 masked men, each armed with a pistol, firing 5 shots at the building. There were no injuries in the shooting. Canadian authorities have increased security at other Jewish schools and synagogues. Political leaders denounced the attack, while Jewish community representatives noted the event as a symptom of rising anti-Semitism in Canada that has been ongoing since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. In Brussels, 2 airsoft grenades were launched at the Israeli embassy. Ambassador of Israel to Belgium and Luxembourg, Edith Rosenzweig-Abu, said there were no injuries and the incident is being investigated. In Germany, authorities arrested 2 men aged 18 and 24 for plotting a knife attack on worshippers at a synagogue. The pair allegedly planned to kill 1 or more worshippers in the attack and then die as martyrs, authorities said in a joint statement. German police are also investigating viral footage of people chanting a Nazi slogan. Participants in the video chant "Germany for the Germans, foreigners out" to the music of a hit disco song, while one does an apparent Nazi salute. Speaking on the recent increase of Jew hatred in the diaspora, U.S. Special Envoy to Combat Anti-Semitism, Deborah Lipstadt, called anti-Semitism a, quote, threat to democracy. Anybody who buys into the conspiracy myth, which is the cornerstone of anti-Semitism, that Jews control the media, banks, government elections, anybody who believes that has given up on democracy, she said, during a virtual event put on by her office. The Anti-Defamation League has also released findings on anti-Semitic incidents outside of Israel since October 7th. There has been a 600% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in Argentina, a 738% increase in Australia, and a 961% increase in Brazil. The alarming jump in global anti-Semitism helps to further underscore the urgent need for global efforts to combat anti-Semitism.
Nearly 24 pro-Israel college students visited Israel last week to learn from Israeli leaders and gather first-hand information about the October 7th massacre to share on their campuses. Here's ILTV's editor-in-chief, Mayan Hoffman, with more.
In the face of recent protests and unrest on many North American campuses, a group of pro-Israel Jewish student leaders from top universities united last week for a Take Action for Israel mission to the country. Hasbara Fellowships and IsraelAmbassadors.com sponsored the mission of around 24 students from universities such as Columbia, Cornell, UPenn, Brandeis, Berkeley, Rutgers, New York, Western Ontario, and Texas. The student leaders met with top Israeli officials, gathered first-hand accounts of the October 7th massacre, spoke with families of hostages, and visited southern border communities. With rising tensions and increasing anti-Semitism and polarization in the U.S. and globally, the visit aimed to give students a chance to engage with officials, residents, and peers, develop strategies to combat anti-Semitism and anti-Israel propaganda, and create impactful messages to share on campus. Ido Nior is a student at the University of Western Ontario in Canada. He told ILTV on Thursday during a special session at the Knesset that he had received death threats and had gangs of anti-Israel students confront him, so much so that he has felt paralyzed or the need to stay quiet. Another student, Jason Diebner, studies at the University of Texas, where on the worst day of the encampment, 70 protesters were arrested, including 40 who did not go to the school, and there were multiple guns and knives found on the protesters.
I was told to go back to Germany. Someone put their hands on my chest, and I was wearing an IDF hoodie of my friend who got shot. He said, "Fuck your dead friend." I had a picture of a hostage and one of the rape victims from October 7th in the back of the truck. Ripped it and said, "Rape's fake. The IDF rapes babies every day." Told me we are Hamas. Told me Hamas is going to come and kill me. What I saw at my campus makes me feel unsafe to walk around with a proud Jewish identity.
MK Danny Danon, who served as Israeli ambassador to the United Nations between 2015 and 2020, itself a hotbed of anti-Semitism, greeted the students on their arrival in Israel and briefed them last week. MK Danon expressed gratitude to the students for standing up against anti-Semitism and emphasized the importance of their advocacy. "I told the students these moments can change their futures," Danon told ILTV after the briefing. He emphasized that if they stand up as leaders of the Jewish community today, they can return to safer campuses for the next generation and proudly say, "I fought back." However, Diebner acknowledged that he is considering Aliyah, as it would allow him to live where he feels more comfortable being Jewish.
And there's a mezuzah in every building. I can wear a yarmulke and no one's going to look at me weird. This is the Jewish home, and it's something important every Jew needs to realize right now. That this is a multi-front war, past just in Israel. You're the college kids in America. Every Jew in America around 20 years old is fighting another war. We're fighting these protesters. We're fighting anti-Semitism, something we haven't seen since the Holocaust.
Let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies are expected tonight around the country, alongside warm temperatures sitting at lows of about 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, partly cloudy skies are expected alongside rising temperatures set to reach highs of 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit. That's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channel, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our website, iltv.tv, with all the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Sivan Raviv. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.